Draft Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me, as always, my co-host, Justis Mosqueda and Justin Higdon. What's up, guys?
Not much, just freezing my ass off in Oregon.
Yeah, and Justin, you're cold in Chicago too, right?
When I got home from work today, 6 p.m. Central, it was 26 degrees, so we're already in the middle of the next polar vortex.
Yeah, it was like 86 today, so it was balmy here in Arizona. So we're
You got a couch for me or what?
yeah. You want to live with 5 kids? I don't think so. You're always welcome to stay, but nobody wants to. So. No, we're here to talk a little bit about the 2015 NFL Draft, and of course, as always do, we're going to get started with the quarterbacks. A lot of bad this weekend, and then of course the one good. And Justice, I'll let you start with your boy Mariota and just kind of what he did and showing that he probably is the man in this draft. Just talk about his performance a little bit from the aspect of throwing the ball, because we've all known he can do a lot with his legs, but just everything he did throwing the ball this week.
Yeah, well, he was able to score 3 more touchdowns through the air. I follow a bunch of people who are in the Oregon athletic department, so they tweet out a bunch of stuff to like pimp him up for the Heisman, I guess. And they said it was like his 5th 4-touchdown game or something on the season. His completion percentage wasn't great, but Utah was going to be a bad matchup for him no matter what. I mean, they have guys like Orchard. I mean, that defensive front is talented, and Oregon's offensive line clearly is not, outside of like Fisher and Grasu. So keeping pressure off of him was going to be an issue the entire time. But he was able to fling that ball around. He gained a bunch of I think it was his season high rushing. I think he finally got over the 100-yard mark. But he was still able to get it done through the air. Like I said, he had 3 touchdowns. He had a 41-yarder. I think he eclipsed over 200 yards. I'm not sure. I think he fell just shy of 250. But I agree with you. I mean, he's the number one guy. I said last year and I said 2 years ago when Marcus Mariota was a redshirt freshman. If I were allowed, if I was allowed to pick anyone in the country to help my franchise since the Fisher draft, Mariota would have been my guy. So there's nothing really new for me there. But I have the luxury of being able to, follow his entire career since when he was a junior in high school playing JV and Oregon offered him. So, there's how much I've seen of him is a little bit different than, everyone else.
Justin, you've been kind of skeptical. No, I wouldn't say skeptical. You haven't been as high on Mariota as a lot of people. What did you see, and what were your thoughts of him just this season in general, and if you saw anything last week?
Well, yeah, I've been kind of, resistant to crowning him, and I'm still really resistant to him as a number 1 overall pick. I see more similarities between him as a prospect and the guys that went in the first round last year. I've probably softened my stance a little bit on him, but you see all of those 3 guys in the first round. One's not playing, the other 2 are really going through their growing pains. I think you're going to see the same thing with Mariota if he has to play early. But that being said, it's just getting near impossible to start, to try and justify some of these other quarterbacks ahead of him. I mean, we'll talk about some guys in a little bit here, but Winston, Golson, Connor Cook, all looking, really kind of bad last week, at least for stretches of the game. And then Brett Hundley's really been kind of up and down, and he's, I think, more of a project than maybe I thought at the beginning of the year. So what's really impressive with Mariota is only 2 picks to 29 touchdowns. You guys mentioned him using his legs a lot. He's had almost 200 rushing yards the last 2 weeks as well. So athletically, there's not going to be any question. The guy can throw the ball. He can run. He's tall. He's, they list him at 220. I don't know if he looks very thick, but 220 is still a big guy. And questions about athleticism, I don't really have them, but being asked to make NFL throws and throwing to tighter windows, I still have my questions there. The games I've seen this year, he's been off, at least off the mark a little bit with his ball placement. It's stuff that a guy can work on with reps, but like I said, he's going to go through growing pains.
When you look at those other quarterbacks that were talked about in the first round, and we'll start with Winston, what do you see in Winston? Because he seems like the type of guy right now that's struggling to get into a rhythm, but then once he gets into a rhythm, I mean, outside of maybe Mariota, and I think you could even say he does things better than Mariota when he gets into that rhythm. It's hard to find anybody that's as good as him. Is that something that coaches in the NFL and scouts in the NFL will look at and say, we can coach that rhythm into that rhythm faster, or is that something that's a legit concern where you may not see him be a guy that you can kind of build around Justis?
See, I think that rhythm comes and goes, right? So you watch the Louisville game, and he clearly was just out of funk. But you watch that Notre Dame game, and they're sending pressure. Bob Diaco is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. And, Winston was able to, anticipate all these passes, hot ball, everything, and just nail them. Like, you watch the Notre Dame game, and Winston actually looks like really, really impressive. Like, that game, late in the game, when he's just firing off pressures, double A gap pressures, and he's able to fire off that ball and get it to his guys. Like, I could see why people would say that they want him more than Mariota, but I think that comes and goes. And I think, he kind of has that elongated motion. I think he's more of a project than people really give him credit for. He struggles with underneath coverage. You saw that against North Carolina State. You saw that against Oklahoma State, where they just, teed off on him on that underneath stuff and just broke on the ball because he kind of stares down his guys. That's why he's kind of good with those hot balls. Is because, he doesn't really have to make that second read where he has to move off of a guy. He likes sticking to that first read a little bit. He clearly has flaws, but I think it's, it's out of hand to assume that he's not going to go high just because he's kind of in that 2 spot. He's a quarterback, and we already had these high hopes for him, even if he hasn't progressed that much this season coming into the year. I could still see him being a top 5 pick, even if he isn't a top 5 talent in this class.
Justin, what are your thoughts on that, and just your thoughts on Winston, the prospect? Let's leave the investigative reporting to other people.
Right. Winston. After, like Justis said, after the Notre Dame game, if that's the only game you watched, then I came away from that game thinking, okay, he's a better on the field prospect to me than Mariota is, but and he does have these things, that the elongated motion, and I've really tried to focus on that because it comes up quite a bit when people are critiquing him, and I think he gets the ball out quickly enough that I don't have huge concerns about that. My biggest concern with him this year is turnovers. He's already got more interceptions. He's got 11 this year. Had 10 all last year. You saw in the Louisville game he had 3 picks, had another one dropped. One of them he negated. He just got really lucky there. And I don't know if he's pressing or what, but he just seems kind of fast and loose with the ball this year and just with his approach in general. He does seem to have the ability to really turn it on when the going gets tough, when he's got to bring the team back. I don't want to say something like Skip Bayless, like he's got the clutch gene, but he really seems to rise to the occasion. And but as a redshirt sophomore, as a young guy, as a guy who's not the most mature, even on the field, then you have to wonder about how soon is he going to be ready. I wouldn't want to have to draft him to start year one. I know a lot of Jets fans talk about drafting him kind of to take over. I would want there to be some warming period, some period where he can cool, wait on the bench, learn from a veteran and not have to go out there right away. But like Justis said, if everything comes back tolerable off the field, then he's going to be a high pick.
He's a guy that I've talked to privately with a couple of Cardinals fans and said, he's a guy that makes a lot of sense in this Arians offense to me. Big guy, can move a little bit in the pocket. He's not a runner, but he's a guy that can move a little bit, extend plays. I've said his best case scenario for a little bit has been getting to Ben Roethlisberger, that type of level. And again, we're talking on the field. But you look at his kind of lower in case, and I've liked I think it might have been you, Justis, that brought up Byron Leftwich with that elongated motion and some of the.
A lot of people are bringing that up. I think that's going to probably be the go-to comparison for him.
And I can definitely see that as a low end, where he's a guy that maybe ends up just being a guy that is a good starter for a couple years, but is mostly a really good backup in the NFL. But I think that high end potential of maybe getting a guy like Ben Roethlisberger in terms of what he can do on the field, that's a risk that teams, again, if everything off the field comes back clean, they may be willing to take. But that's something that's hard to figure out. Golson, man, what a disappointing
I
game.
picked the perfect week to do my little study and tell everyone that I didn't like Golson.
You really did. Like, that could not have happened at a better week for you. Some interesting stuff came out after the game with the way Brian Kelly reacted. We'll get to that afterwards, but Golson has to learn to take care of the ball. I guess that's the first thing. A lot of people say, oh, look at Russell Wilson, what he's done for short quarterbacks, and then Johnny Manziel's a shorter quarterback. But those guys weren't careless with the ball. Golson's been really careless with the ball, even though he has been really good this year. Is that the biggest concern going forward, or are there more concerns for you, Justis?
I think my biggest concern is just that, he, a lot of people. I guess we've had more time with Hundley, right? So with Hundley, we've seen him, progress since he was a redshirt freshman. Talking about him as an NFL prospect, being, the future leader of a franchise. But we featured, Hundley's miscues, at least mentally. But we haven't really looked as deep with Golson. Golson makes a lot of mental mistakes, man. Sometimes they'll be sending double A-gap pressure. They'll have 7 guys coming against empty protection, and a running back will throw up his hands, waving at Golson, telling him that he's open, and Golson will completely miss him. That stuff's just insane to me. Coming into the game, that was really the point that I was trying to pound. That all right, ASU blitzes a lot. Golson really can't mentally take advantage of the blitz the same way some other guys are able to. And I don't know if that's because, this is his first year back since he was suspended for a year and he was working with Whitfield in California, or, just exactly, pinpointing where that comes from. But that was clearly a flaw of his, and it really showed itself against ASU. To be totally honest, I turned that game off at halftime and went to go shoot some Jays at the local basketball court. People were tweeting at me yo, the Golson hater hasn't been talking much in the second half, and I was like, what are you guys talking about? There was a second half to this game. Apparently they started leading a little bit of a comeback, but y'all got to inform me on that one because I haven't seen the rewind of it yet, and I've really pretty much missed the entire second half of that thing because I went to go do better things with my time than watching a game that I thought ASU was going to blow them out in.
Did you get to watch any of it, Justin?
Yeah, I saw that whole game, and Golson did bring back, did lead a comeback in the second half, and I got some curious stats on this because, for one thing, I really liked him after the Syracuse game, and we've talked a little bit about that before, but it's kind of been downhill like that since then, and now I'm kind of leaning toward. Well, I've leaned heavily toward he should probably return. He's not ready for the pro game. Now, what I found was interesting, this was the Pro Football Focus college game of the week, and despite the 4 picks, and yeah, a couple of them were on tip balls, Golson somehow managed a slightly positive grade. Now, I don't know if that's because he led a second-half comeback, and ultimately they still lost by a good amount of points. But I just found that very odd. I didn't think his performance at all merited any type of positive grade. Golson's got 7. Let me see. He's got 9 interceptions in the last 5 games. He's got 17 turnovers in the last 6 games. 17 turnovers, interceptions, and fumbles. That's just unacceptable. That's almost 3 per game, and you can't win like that. And Brian Kelly, as you mentioned, frustrated after the game, and almost like sounds like he's getting ready to consider a move at quarterback. I don't know who they would turn to. I don't follow the team closely enough to know that, and I don't really think ultimately that's going to happen. But when a guy's turning it over 3 times a game, it's going to be more than a passing thought in any coach's mind.
See, the thing about you brought up the Syracuse game, and I was actually charting that. I need to get back into charting these quarterbacks. I haven't done anything like a month, I think, as far as charting goes. But I think I charted like 4 of his games. And the Syracuse game really jumped out at me because everyone was freaking out about, how efficient he was with the ball. Half of the passes in that Syracuse game were behind the line of scrimmage.
Right.
It's really interesting to see how Notre Dame uses him and how the public is reacting to him as opposed to, how he's just performing purely statistically on the field. Because it almost kind of reminds you of Taj Boyd, right? Like, I think that's pretty I don't think that's a great comparison. I think there's plenty of guys that you can compare Golson to rather than Boyd. They both kind of have that efficiency, mold into them. That short guy, college, he's efficient. He can move around. He can hit the deep ball, but he's not hitting it really with velocity, and he's kind of hanging that thing out like a rainbow. Those tip balls, though, I mean, that's evident on tape. Like, there'll be dudes that are like 7 yards off the line of scrimmage, and they're pass rushing, or not 7 yards off the line of scrimmage, but 7 yards away from him in the pocket, and they'll be able to tip those things. NFLDraftScout.com has him listed as a lower height than Andy Murray or Aaron Murray and Taj Boyd were coming out last season. And Boyd was different because he could adjust his arm angles, and Aaron Murray was actually really good at finding passing lanes between the offensive line. Golson really hasn't shown that he can do either, which is terrible for a short quarterback, especially if you're going to be even smaller than them. I mean, unless you're going to be on on the move like Russell Wilson, but even Russell Wilson can adjust that arm angle. I mean, who really has been able to have success as a short quarterback, other than Vic in small amount of times without being able to find that passing lane or adjusting your arm angle? There's a lot of things going on with Golson. Now, I was actually talking to an agent who kind of showed a little bit of interest in him earlier this season, and he was telling me, I can't see a way that this kid's going to come out this year. So I think, that's pretty telling that someone who, potentially could have had money invested in this guy if he pursued him, is kind of thinking, all right, maybe this isn't the guy that I want to go after. So, I really think he's going to probably end up going back to school, and I think that's probably the best decision.
The situation with Brian Kelly and what is kind of weirdly going on between them, do you think that'll play into any decision he makes, or should it just be completely about he's not ready yet and he's not developmentally there yet? Justin,
for me,
go ahead. Justin first.
Yeah, I don't know if your coach is considering, if your college coach is considering making a move to another guy. I'm not sure that the best thing for you to do for your future would be to leave and go to the NFL, where that's going to be a stigma that follows you. That's going to be a red check mark next to your name when they're going down the list of reasons why not to pick you. So then that leaves a couple other possibilities. If Brian Kelly is that frustrated that he's considering making some kind of switch during the offseason, it's going to have to come into consideration of whether or not he stays at Notre Dame. But does he look to transfer someplace, or does he go pro? And Golson already went through a lot to stay at Notre Dame, so it's hard for me to imagine him leaving and going to another school. So if Kelly puts him in that position, it's just a very bad position for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, that almost like one big knock that David Fales had, right, was that he went to Wyoming and spent like a week in Wyoming or like 2 weeks in Wyoming and bounced out seeing Brett Smith, who was a true freshman. So the NFL knocked him pretty badly, and the internet community really liked David Fales, but he was drafted as a sixth rounder and ended up now he's on the practice squad in Chicago. He's not even on an active roster. So yeah, I think bailing out early is really not something that teams want to see in their quarterbacks. The guys who might potentially lead their franchise. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, and when you just look at the situation, you wonder, if he kind of runs away from it, so to speak, if that would, like you guys said, stick with him in that stigma, and how that would impact his future going forward. I watch Notre Dame every week because that's who my wife's family watches, and so I watch them. Golson's just too up and down. The ball doesn't seem like it's important enough to him, which is a concern I always have with a guy like that. So for me, it's just about what can he do going forward, and can he improve in 2015? And I think that's going to be the question for him going forward. Anything else on quarterbacks, Justis?
Let me think. That was really it. I mean, the Golson one was really the big one for me this weekend. I know Kaim Fahy and Josh Norris both wrote stuff for Roto World, NBC Sports. I'm a fan of both of them. We just see differently on this. I wasn't a huge Golson guy. I think they both like Golson. We kind of had a back and forth all week. I was tweeting stuff for 2 days. I think I spent trying to watch this dude, and I had already charted like a month's worth of games previously in the season. That was really the big one that stood out to me. I mean, everyone else pretty much played how I expected them to play.
Anything for you, Justin?
Yeah, I just want to touch on a couple things. Golson, for me, stock is just going down. I hope he can hold on to that starting job and get back to school one more year and maybe see what he can do. But I know we're going to get into Senior Bowl here in a little bit, but I wanted to just touch on a couple guys. Taylor Heineke, who we've talked about on the show before, and Taylor Kelly, the two Taylors. Those guys rumored to have East-West Shrine Game invites. So that's a couple of early invites. We'll get into the Senior Bowl ones here in a bit, but I wanted to just mention that actually makes the East-West Shrine Game a little bit interesting to me.
Yeah, and that can bring us into our next segment, the rumor segment, and I was kind of excited to see that on Optimum Scouting today, talking about Taylor Kelly, because as much of a Taylor Kelly hater as I might be to a lot of people, I like and I respect how hard he works. I like when guys like that get a chance to do a little something, because he's not really a great prospect. Somebody asked me on Twitter today, does he get drafted in 2015? No, I mean, but the Shrine Game will at least give him a platform to maybe change that a little bit. So he's kind of Tommy Reese. I don't know, maybe. I mean, he can run better, but I think that's kind of who he is as a passer, is Tommy Reese. So. What about you, Justis? Anything you've heard out of the Senior Bowl and Shrine Game?
I agree with your stuff on Taylor Kelly. I know we've had this back and forth too. I don't think he's particularly talented, but I think he's going to make a camp, and I think you can run with it once you're there. I've been watching Garrett Grayson, who is a guy who was rumored to go to the Senior Bowl by Tony Pauline a couple weeks ago. We talked about when he dropped all these names about the quarterbacks. And it looks like he was right about Shane Carden, at least. He's the one name that's shown up on this list that he nailed on for the quarterbacks. Grayson looks all right. I think Matt Harmon wrote for Optimum Scouting that he's draftable. I think that was like the headline. It was like, there's another draftable senior quarterback. Like that's a big deal. you know, he looks decent. I'm not sure. I honestly haven't seen that much, but I think I watched 2 games when I was trying to look at their left tackle because I think he's actually really talented. You know, he was on that fringe draftable thing for me. You know, Carden made the Senior Bowl. I'm not sure if he should have. A quarterback like that, like if you're not going to have the efficiency downfield for me, I'm not going to be super interested in this guy if he doesn't have an arm. And I know that makes me like the arm talent guy or whatever. But that's just my opinion. I mean, I like David Fales. David Fales was super efficient downfield, even though he didn't have the arm. I don't think Shane Carden is that, and David Fales was drafted in the 6th round. So what does that say about Carden's in the eyes of the NFL? You know, I really like guys like Carl Davis. Carl Davis could probably play nose tackle or I guess I shouldn't say nose tackle. I should say 1-tech or 3-tech. I think he could play or 1-tech for a one-gapping team. You know, he's bigger, but he can penetrate. Some team. I mean, Green Bay's going to draft him in like the 2nd round and start him day 1. It's going to be stupid. They do stuff like this every year. Nate Orchard got in from Utah. I really like that because he's kind of been like my guy. Like I'm not super high on him. I think he's probably going to end up being like a 3rd rounder or something. But he was a guy that I really liked in the preseason, and I was trying to pump him up. It's unfortunate that I didn't write anything about him on Draft Breakdown. I wrote about Fisher and I wrote about Kikaha in depth on Draft Breakdown before the season. They had both ended up breaking out. Orchard was another guy that I really liked based on watching him against Stanford like the past 2 seasons. DeJuan Smith, I'm not sure exactly how you say his name, the cornerback out of Florida Atlantic. He's Dane Brugler's boy, and he says he's real good. And I haven't seen any Florida Atlantic this year, but if Dane says he's good, I'm willing to ride with that for a while. Like I need to see some of his stuff. The one name that I was actually surprised by were those Penn State guys. Like I hadn't heard anything about these Penn State guys, the linebacker and the safety, Adrian Amos and Mike Hall. I have heard that Tart guy, the safety out of Stanford, apparently he's really talented, like 2nd round talented, like early day 2s type stuff. But he apparently didn't look good against TCU. So I don't know what to make out of that. But you know, people that know things were pretty excited about that Stanford safety, and the fact that he got a Senior Bowl bid is interesting to me. My whole take on these small school guys, usually outside of the quarterbacks, is, you know, just kind of wait until they end up at one of these All-Star games. And if they show up at one of these All-Star games, then I'll go back and try to watch some of their stuff. And that's pretty much where I'm at with him and with Smith, that quarterback at the Florida Atlantic.
For me, I was excited to see David Johnson. I've caught a couple Northern Iowa games in like ESPN3 replay hell while I'm sitting here doing nothing. And you know, a talented guy. I like those smaller, compact backs like that. And like just said, it's always fun to see a smaller school guy get a chance to go up against the big boys at the Senior Bowl or something of that. So that'll be a fun one. What did you guys think of Malden? I know he's a talented guy that a lot of people like. Could this be kind of a place where he gets a chance to break out, or is there not enough senior offensive tackle talent where he's going to have a show, you know, a stage to put on a show?
I think there's going to be some decent offensive tackle talent, especially if Tyson Braylo, who Justis alluded to earlier from Colorado State, gets in there. He would prove to be a tough matchup for any edge player. But I think Malden is a player who could surpass a guy like Nate Orchard and maybe work his way even into the later part of round 1. He's been pretty impressive in some of the games I've seen. Now, I haven't seen Louisville since about week 3 or 4, so there may be people out there who think that he's fallen off a bit, and I have to take a look back. But he struck me as a guy who has a good skill set to rush the passer and who also plays the run pretty well, which is similar to a guy like Orchard. So it'd be interesting for me to see those two guys who I kind of have lumped in the same area and see which one of them would come out of a week like the Senior Bowl week with a head up.
Yeah, he's one of Dane's guys. I think NFL Draft Scout right now has him as listed as like a fringe first rounder or something like that. Um, he's interesting because you're right. He could jump over a guy like Nate Orchard, who the public is talking about more than he is, or than he's being talked about. Because Nate Orchard's kind of odd because he's really stiff in space, almost like Marcus Smith, who was Malden's teammate at Louisville last season. I think is a bit bendier than Orchard. The tackle class should be solid, but I'm not sure how great it's going to be. Like I could see him beating some of these guys. I could see him beating Scherf. I could see him beating a Boyke in one-on-one drills. So yeah, it'll be interesting. This whole Senior Bowl class actually, to me, is going to be interesting because I'm just like waiting for some of these guys to break out because I don't see a bunch of talent. Like usually half of the first round-ish is seniors, and I can't name 16 seniors that are worth first round picks right now.
What about you, Justin? Who have you liked so far that you've seen get the call for the Senior Bowls?
That cornerback from Florida Atlantic, DeJon Smith, I happened to see him a couple weeks ago against Marshall and Rakeem Cato, and he played a really good game in that one. He broke up a couple passes. He was called twice for pass interference on downfield throws, and really they were phantom calls. He had really tight coverage on those plays. I've seen some discrepancies in his size, so for a guy like him, the weigh-in's going to be important. Is he closer to 6 foot, 5'11", or is he going to be closer to 5'9.5"? And I've kind of seen a discrepancy there. He's got solid build, looked to be a pretty strong guy as far as being able to press and things like that. And he also was returning kicks in that game, and he had he had 6 kick returns, and I think he was averaging about 30 to 33 yards a return. I know he had over 200 kick return yards. So that's going to be something that always adds value. If you can return kicks, and especially if you're a later round, like third round or later kind of guy and can return kicks, that's going to pique the interest. Another corner that I don't think the invite's official, but it's Quentin Rollins from Miami, Ohio. And this is his first year playing college football. He was a college basketball player.
Yeah, I remember
right.
or someone was talking about him.
And that's another guy, Dane. Yeah, Dane was talking about him today, and he does have 4 interceptions this year. I haven't seen a lick of MAC football this year. That's usually something I catch up on in December, especially if they get into a bowl game. I don't think Miami, Ohio is very good, but that'll be an interesting one because that's a player who's obviously made enough of an impression on the scouting community to earn an invite to the premier All-Star game based off of 1 year of college football.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations where guys get to come in and show off, like you said, and getting that chance, especially off only 1 year of college football, and it's not even a year yet. That's impressive, and maybe those guys come in and make a play. The last guy I wanted to ask Justis about, because 3-4 teams. Well, I mean, the Browns are 3-4 team too, but you guys draft pass rushers all the time. Trey Flowers out of Arkansas, not confirmed yet, but is he a guy that just needs a stage to break out on, or is he just too small?
Yeah, he's a little undersized, but I mean, Chris Smith was too, and I love Chris Smith. Even though math rushers, shouts to math rushers. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are watching Arkansas football. I know it's SEC football. I know they were able to keep it close against guys like Bama and stuff like that. But I don't think a lot of people are going out of their way to watch Brett Bielema coach teams. I think, like I said, I'm just kind of waiting for some of these guys to break out, and I'm hoping that the Senior Bowl is a venue for that.
Any other Senior Bowl talk, guys? Oh, surprise! Dane Brugler asked on Twitter, any who would surprise us if they got an invite? I know Justin and I are kind of in lockstep on this, but Brandon Bridge would surprise me. Justis, who would surprise you?
Man, you guys are crazy. I like him. Brian Bennett, man, I'm still shocked that if he's going to get a Senior Bowl invite. It was rumored by Tony Pauline. We talked about this a little while ago. If he gets one, man, like I'm not really seeing it with him. Like he's kind of undersized. He doesn't really have an arm. I mean, I guess his thing would be like Chip Kelly recruited him, and he used to play at Oregon. He was kind of the guy before Marcus Mariota, and he might have been the guy to push Darren Thomas out. But like I'm just not seeing him with him as a prospect. Like I can't see that guy getting drafted.
Justin, for you?
Well, I would say Brian Bennett would be the most surprising. But let's just throw one out there just for fun. Let's say that Braxton Miller decides to make himself eligible for the Senior Bowl and gets an invite as a running back, kind of a la, or as a receiver, kind of a la what happened with Denard Robinson or McKinnon last year. That would be the most surprising development in Senior Bowl to me, outside of seeing somebody who really just doesn't belong there, like a Bennett.
The Senior Bowl this year, because of, I don't want to say the lack of talent, but maybe the lack of talent at the quarterback position, it's going to open some doors for guys. So I think you could see some maybe surprising additions for that. But, I mean, Bennett makes sense as a guy that would be surprised that may go. Let's see. Running through these real quick on Twitter. You got an EFO question, Justis.
Yeah.
My
whole take on it. Okay.
Let me ask it real quick so everybody knows what we're talking about. Josh Thomas Photo asked, is EFO still a projected first rounder after his decline this season, or will he even play corner or transition to safety?
My whole take on him is he's either going to have to move into the slot, play a lot of off coverage, or he's going to have to be, a high safety. And I'm not opposed to him as a high safety. I think his game against Michigan State shows that, he has a bunch of range. I mean, they really tested that out on him. And if you watch that interception that he got against Michigan State, just absolutely lays out for that thing, covers so much ground. I think it'd almost be a waste to, use his talent as a cornerback in the way that you'd have to use him as a cornerback. Because this guy's not going to be able to run press. I mean, you watch the game against Arizona, you watch the game against Washington State, all these teams, I mean, he'll do fine between the 20s, but after the 20s, man, like these teams are just going to target him for touchdowns. He just doesn't have the length to compete with these guys, and that's at the Pac-12 level. I mean, can you imagine the jump from, a Pac-12 receiver to having to go against a guy like, Alshon Jeffrey or Brandon Marshall? There's not really a good matchup on either side of that if you're playing boundary field, left, right, no matter what. Me personally, I'd probably have him like a team like Jacksonville, who plays a lot of cover 3. You're going to need a safety, that's playing really just the middle of the field, cover a lot of ground on both the left and the right side. Taking him like in the early second round, maybe, trade up to the back end of the second round. That's where I'd probably have EFO at this point. Like an early-ish day 2 free safety, just, kind of cover in the middle of the field, because you really just want to have him play with his range. I mean, he's a decent tackler, but he's pretty small. I mean, you wonder how much those guys can take hits, right? Like we saw this with Jason Verrett. If you're a small defensive back, the way the NFL makes you play now, I mean, your shoulder's really kind of like your shock pad. And he's just started messing up his shoulder, and you just see it repeatedly. Like we saw it in college, we're seeing it now. You got to make some hits, but you kind of got to limit that a little bit.
Justin, do you have anything to add on EFO at all?
Nothing really. I mean, I saw some of those games where he was beaten for touchdowns, like Justis was talking about, and I guess I was kind of always surprised at how highly touted he was, and it seemed to all stem from a game where he was covering Marquise Lee, and he had a really great battle with him that day. But aside from that, throughout his career, I've always had some concerns as far as size and things like that. You know, he had some really great turnover stats a couple years ago, but when I saw Bucky Brooks compare him to Darrelle Revis this summer, I knew we were on a hype train that was just spinning out of control.
I must have missed that. That's funny.
I think Bucky's gone a little bit wild with those comparisons too. Because who did he compare to Deion Sanders? He compared to Sanders a couple years ago. Like some guy who it was dang it, it was that Florida cornerback who didn't get drafted. What's his name? Purefoy? He compared to Purefoy.
Oh my god.
Yep.
Purefoy was only about 0.5 slower than Deion in the 40 time. So.
Woo, man, these hot takes. Man, these hot takes sometimes when you start them, they can't stop. Golden age.
Yeah, exactly. One last question to kind of round out the questions from Twitter. Offensive and defensive line in the top 10. I mean, if we're talking strictly defensive line and not maybe outside rushers, I think that's a little harder to figure out because I think you have a couple guys that might go in the top 10, Randy Gregory and maybe like a Vic Beasley. But I think Leonard Williams is probably a consensus guy right now in the top 10. And I don't know what to think of these tackle prospects because Agbui and Scherf, I haven't been super impressed with them. La'el Collins might end up being kind of the best of the bunch right now. What are your thoughts, Justice?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through a list of names right now, and really the only guys that I'd say are like top 10 guys, Leonard Williams, I think Eddie Goldman's up there. I think Eddie Goldman's really talented at defensive tackle out of Florida State, and I think he's going to declare. I just kind of get that feeling from him. La'el Collins, I think that guy's like a fringe top 10. And I think, Ronnie Stanley, the left tackle out of Notre Dame, I actually really like him. I'm probably going to be higher on him than, 90% of the people in the draft community are based on where he's going in like mock drafts and rankings and stuff. I think those are like the four that I'd go with the top 10, which I guess is like a decent amount. But, coming into the season where we were talking about, Boyhe and all, Andres Pete and all these guys, potentially going in the top 5 and stuff, Scherf, guys like that, you just kind of feel disappointed with this lineman class. And I know we're not counting edge rushers, and the edge rushing class might be the most deep position in this draft, which is like really weird to think about since it's a premier position. But yeah, I think those are the four guys that I'd probably ride with if I were, forced to make a pick on who would go in the top 10.
Justin, what about you?
This is a tough question for me because I'm not a huge La'el Collins guy. I still have him as a guard, and I think a lot of people are telling me he's been better at tackle, but I just have major concerns about his lateral movement, especially when he has to mirror a guy back on an inside and an outside-inside kind of move across the face. And he just always has seemed to struggle with that throughout his career. Now, I understand that the Auburn game this year was one of his best games, and I haven't seen that one, but he's never struck me as a top 10 guy. Bowie, again, I didn't even think he was a first-round guy. Scherf, I've kind of flipped and consider him a guard as well. My favorite senior tackle is Sambrailo, and I'm not sure. I think he's a first-round prospect, but I wouldn't put him in the top 10. I think Leonard Williams is a top 10 defensive lineman, if not the best player in the draft. He's probably the top 2 or 3, depending on who else comes out. And Stanley, I liked him a lot from what I saw this year. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he's a redshirt sophomore.
Right.
And I'm not sure that he's even going to come out. He's getting a lot of run right now, and deservedly so. But if he decides to come back, that takes probably at least the second best tackle I've seen this year out of the mix.
Yeah, he's a guy who's still talking about molding his game after Joe Staley and Tyson Tyson. So like I'm not sure if he's going to come out, and obviously his body isn't ideal for what you want in a guy you could plug and play. But I just think he's so talented. I know Josh Norris is, it's one of Josh Norris's guys, and Sully Sparks is too, and Sully knows way more about offensive line than I can even dream about. So I just kind of feel good and validated in my hot take that he's a talented dude even though he's only a redshirt sophomore. We'll see. I mean, Greg Robinson, I tweeted this out I think last week. Greg Robinson really didn't make an appearance for like the draft community until Mel Kiper ranked him like super high at the end of November, and he was a redshirt sophomore too. So maybe we'll see him like start rising boards a lot, and maybe that'll make him consider coming out. Not to say that he's taking account of internet draft boards, but he's definitely a guy that people should like actually be watching all the time. I think I tweeted that out once Notre Dame ended up going down like 3 scores or something in the first half. I was like, you guys, if you're still watching Notre Dame, just like watch the left tackle just cook. Like, he's really good.
Yeah, and a couple of defensive linemen who could make a move just because of how weird this class is. Michael Bennett from Ohio State, he had an outstanding game against Michigan State last weekend in prime time. He's making a lot of room for Joey Bosa. I'm not saying he's a top 10 guy, but the way he can penetrate and kind of put pressure up the middle, he's a guy who could make a move. And Sheldon Day from Notre Dame is another guy I think can make a move. But top 10, it's so tough to say. Right now, I would probably only put Stanley if he comes out and Leonard Williams.
That's interesting. Another guy to look out for is that Jack Conklin from Michigan State. He's also a redshirt sophomore. He's their left tackle. A lot of smart. I haven't really studied him. I haven't really watched Michigan State all that much outside of the Nebraska game, the Ohio State game, and the Oregon game. And 2 of those were only live studies. But smart people seem to really like this guy. He's risen all the way to number 2 on the sophomore boards, only behind Tunsil for NFL Draft Scout and stuff. So that's another name just to throw out there that might be like the Greg Robinson of this class. But as you brought up, these redshirt sophomores, I mean, you never know who's going to come out and who's not going to come out.
Anything else on the D-line, O-line, guys?
No, that's about it.
Until we get to the hot takes.
All right, let's get the hot take started. Justice, you're chomping at the bit. Get it started, man.
Yeah, man. People really like pointing out how much they don't like Sean Oakman. Like, people already are just like, every single time Oakman gets like bodied, people will just fire off tweets, and then Oakman will like have a sack, and they'll be like, well, we can't do that consistently. Man, that's not really how pressure works. Like, you a college lineman that gets consistent pressure. I mean, these guys really aren't getting rotated. I mean, I know Oakman gets rotated more than the average guy would, and he wasn't even a starter last season. But man, like people really dislike Oakman. I think someone was saying that like they weren't even sure if they should like rank him on their board because he's going to go day 3. And I'm like,
what?
Man, you don't understand. You don't understand how this planet theory thing works. Like, if you're huge, teams usually just like ride for you, especially if you're athletic. Like, people almost just draft you on that concept alone.
Yeah, if we're talking about linemen, like any part of the line, Oakman's going to be a top 10 pick, and people should get used to that because, just look at his improvement from last year to this year. I'm with you all the way. I've been a supporter of Oakman. He's not a finished product, but look at a guy that big, that strong, and that quick off the snap. If he could just get his hands up a little bit in the passing lane, he'd be that much better.
And I think you brought this up. I know I responded to it at some point. I think it was you though that you were talking about the passing lane thing earlier during the Oklahoma game, and I was like, man, see, that's the thing. People don't understand with these huge defensive linemen. When Hagman was coming out, people kept getting mad that he would throw his arms up and try to get in the way of the passing lane. And Greg Piszczek, who writes for he does some stuff for Roto-World for Josh Norris. And he was saying, when you take all these numbers and you just put in like raw data and you take into account of like pressures and all sorts of stuff, and then you take into account of being able to tip down those balls, Hagman being able to throw his hands up, actually made him like the second most efficient defensive lineman in last year's draft class, only behind Aaron Donald. Both math rushers and guys that, I was willing to ride for, even though, Donald was a bit undersized and Hagman definitely didn't have it all the way together yet, or at least wasn't consistent enough at it. I completely agree. I just don't know, I just don't know if, the internet community is doing the math correctly on how to value, these huge defensive linemen and how exactly, they looked like when they were coming out in college. Like J.J. Watt was the 11th overall pick or something. Like
right.
J.J. Watt was J.J. Watt when he came out. He was clearly talented, but he wasn't what he is now. And that's kind of what you have to do with these huge guys. Is you're like, all right, this is planet theory. Like, what are these guys gonna be when it's time to sign that second contract?
Justin, do you have any hot takes for us?
I've got one. Jalen Strong makes a comeback this week. He was the subject of a hot take last week, and the hot take this week goes a step further. And I actually saw a tweet saying that in reference to Strong, the guy I saw on tape, I wouldn't even draft him. It was either I wouldn't draft him or I don't think I would draft him. Now, the tweet also said I'd need to see more, but I don't know what game you would see Jalen Strong in and determine that he's an undraftable player, especially after this week when he made one of the most ridiculous catches that we've seen in college football. Now, there was a game, it was an amazing catch. Yeah. And, that was one of the things that we all tweeted each other about how his ball skills and things like that. Jalen Strong, if I have to point to one game where he doesn't look great, it's the Utah game. And he did have a couple plays that I thought he could have made that he didn't. I don't know if they were out-and-out drops, but they were plays that he could have made. That being said, this is another big, fast guy that can run, can catch the ball away from his body. I don't see any way he gets out of the second round, let alone going undrafted. And I just think that, criteria differs from person to person, and this is why some of the stats guys from the fantasy community tend to deride film guys, because I think at some point you have to use the whole equation. You can't just say, I saw this guy on tape and he's undraftable, especially if you're referring to a guy like Strong or Oakman.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot recently with just blanket statements on guys. You kind of hit it with Strong, and whoever made the Oakman statement about him as a day 3 type of guy. It's not just their stats in Oakman's case, and it's not just one section of film in Strong's case where you determine whether or not they're good. And I feel like a lot of people watch a section of film and make a out-and-out decision on what they think of a kid. So, I think body of work is important. I think stats and projections are important. But, not to pick on our boy Davis Maddock, but the Odell Beckham hate was really strong, and I thought misplaced for him coming out. And I think all it does is it's a learning experience almost, that maybe what you've used in the past is not just a blanket that you can throw over every prospect that goes into that mold.
Yeah, and if a guy like that does end up flopping once you get to the pros, then to go back and point to it and say, I said so-and-so was undrafted, there's a number of reasons why a guy might not be a successful professional player, but it doesn't mean that he wasn't a good prospect at the time. So you have to wonder, it'd be one thing if you said, I thought Julian Edelman was a first-round pick, and look how right I am. That's a shot in the dark, And even with as good as he's turned out to be, I'm not sure you would say today that you could justify something like that. But those are the kind of statements I think embolden people. And I have love for the stats community, the metrics community, and the film community. I like to unite all fronts, and like you said, learn from all of it.
Any other hot takes you saw, Justice?
You know what? Yeah. This is kind of odd because this is almost like the riser right now, right? Is the Louisville safety, Gerard Holloman. Honestly, I hit defensive backs last usually, so I don't really go in depth. I mean, I watched a lot of guys in the preseason, so I know I really like guys like Marcus Peters. Like he was my #1 corner coming out. I really liked him a lot more than Efo, stuff like that. I like Trey Waynes. But safeties are really hard to read on film, especially this early in the season when it's limited amount of film and draft breakdown. Just draft breakdown, you guys do God's work. Hasn't put a bunch of stuff up yet. He was a guy who I didn't even know about until he was named to the Bednarik Award. He was a Bednarik Award semifinalist. That happened on November 3rd. I'm writing this Draftniks Draft Crushes piece for Draft Breakdown, which hopefully will go up on Friday. And I was emailing Bleacher Report's head draft writer Matt Miller, and he told me on November 10th that the guy he'd compare him the most to is Ed Reed. And 2 days later, sure enough, Bucky Brooks wrote a piece. Not to say that Bucky steals things from Matt Miller. Matt Miller said this in an email to me, which is personal. I just wanted to give him a little shout out for saying it, a couple days before he did. He compared him. He said scouts will look at him like a young Ed Reed. I don't know if you guys have seen Holloman at all. I haven't been able to check him out still. I'm hoping to hit him this week. But if he's half as good as Ed Reed, that's a really talented safety, and that's like a game changer in this.
I've watched a little bit of Louisville, but not a ton, and just off the top of my head, I don't remember seeing an Ed Reed out there, but it's broadcast angles are so bad for any type of safety stuff, so I'll have to pay more attention. Have you seen anything, Justin?
I actually Draft Breakdown put up Holloman versus Boston College, and I had seen Holloman in a previous game earlier in the season, I believe against Syracuse. He had 2 interceptions in that game, and then he had 2 interceptions and dropped another one against Florida State. So he's definitely a ball magnet. But the interesting thing about the Draft Breakdown clip against Boston College, and he's going against their quarterback Murphy, who I don't think any of us are going to bang the table for and say is a pro prospect. But Holloman seems to be a gambler to me. Like he's going to play for that interception, and that is also going to lead to a couple of big burns. And that did happen in that Boston College game. If you look back at it, he also dropped a 4th interception. His first interception that he had was off a tip pass. The guy's a ball magnet. It kind of reminds me just statistically of David Amerson a couple years back, and then he came back the following year and fell off and ended up being a 3rd-round pick. I'm not going to, compare Holloman to a Hall of Fame safety. With all due respect to those other guys who do a lot of work with the tape. But the other interesting thing about Holloman is he's listed on the team bio as a redshirt sophomore. He's actually in his 3rd year because he had I believe he had a redshirt and then an injury redshirt. Or maybe, but they listed 2013 as his freshman year, and he graduated high school in 2011. So I don't know. There's some discrepancy of what year he actually is, but the team bio does still list him as a redshirt sophomore. So that could play in. We talk him out that often.
Yeah, everything that I've seen has him listed as a redshirt sophomore too. I was just trying to get a little bit of information on him. Like you said, you think he's a gambler. I've heard people talk about him and say, he sure plays like a former cornerback, stuff like that. Dylan Bishop just tweeted it out. I really want to like Gerard Holloman, but I don't like the idea of a safety that can't tackle. From the feeling that I've got when I was talking to people, it sounds like he and James Sample, the other safety, He's the University of Washington transfer. It sounds like both of them are like thinking about coming out at the same time. So, even though he's a redshirt sophomore, all these pieces are coming out about how good he is, comparing him to Ed Reed. He's on. I think he's on track to break the interception record. Maybe we should be considering these guys as legitimate at this point. At least as guys who may declare in the class, as much as not like first rounders, just taking someone's word for it. I can't wait to plug his stuff in, and I think I'll try. I'm writing a weekly piece now for Football Savages on just a draft prospect. I'll see if I can try to hit him tomorrow. That way I can make that piece about him, and then we can talk about him next week. Because, like I said, he's this guy who's just like I said, I hadn't heard his name up until last week when I saw that he was a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year in college. So to see people compare him to Ed Reed that same week kind of opens my eyes and just made me question a couple of things. Because he almost seemed like he came out of absolutely nowhere. He just dropped out of space like an alien.
And one more thing I wanted to add really briefly was J.M. Pask from Draft Breakdown, who tweeted out the Holloman video this week, also said this morning that he missed all of, I believe, the 2012 season because of a shoulder injury. I think it was his left shoulder, and that could be part of why he's not too keen on the tackling.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't realize that, but those are always things that you kind of find out as you move along in the draft process and as you work through things. So we'll see as we get there. Anything else tonight, gentlemen?
Let me think. I've heard a couple rumors. I think I've talked about Booker from Utah. I think he's going to end up declaring. I think there was a report out that said Aguilar and Leonard Williams were going to sign to an agent together. As far as I've heard, that the agents who are talking to me about, what do you think about Aguilar and Leonard Williams, they're all talking about them as a tandem. So that rumor seems to, check out at least on the surface. I'm not trying to dig too deeply on that, but surface level, it seems like the hints are clearly there. And DeForest Buckner got another guy out here west from the University of Oregon. It sounds like him. He seems to be one of the locks, along with Marcus Mariota and Eric Armstead, to leave the University of Oregon a year early.
That's interesting. Armstead is one of those guys that where do kind of five techniques go at this point?
Yeah.
That aren't not JJ Watt five techniques.
Right. We had Brett Urban last year, and we had Taylor Hart, and both of them were a little bit banged up, so it's hard to do the math on that. But I agree. I don't think that he's going to be a great guy at this next level. But have either of you seen what happened with his brother? He was at the University of Southern California, and he had a heart issue. It didn't allow him to play at the University of Southern California his last season. He ended up going to the CFL. I think he led the CFL in sacks when he was a rookie up there. And that's hard for a defensive tackle. I think they play a yard off the line of scrimmage, so it's not exactly like American football. And then he got a deal with the New England Patriots that essentially paid him like a second rounder. And then he just ended up getting hurt again, and he never cleared with the Patriots. So Armstead got like a $5 million insurance policy before the season, and that was just kind of like the telltale thing where it was like, all right, this kid, because of what happened to his brother, he's going to try to leave as early as possible and just try to get the money while he can and try to get on that second contract. Because it just seemed like his brother had all this talent. Like, his brother could have been a first-round pick, but he just had that heart issue. He couldn't end up playing. He ended up going to CFL, and then he came back and got hurt. So it's just kind of this terrible situation that's probably going to impact, what Armstead's doing in the draft.
That is interesting. I had not heard that, so that's something to kind of watch as we move through that. Justin, anything else for you?
I wanted to just touch on the report from Roto World Draft. I think it was yesterday, and it was early in the day. I kind of missed it, and caught back up to it today, but it had a scout saying that Cedric Abui, the tackle from Texas A&M, who's now moving over to the right side to accommodate Jarvis Harrison staying over there on the left side. But it said Abui was a 4th-round guy on tape. So this is another instance that I kind of, I've definitely been lower on Abui than a lot of people, and I've never really warmed up to him as a first-round pick. But a guy with that kind of athletic ability and arm length that he's going to turn out with, that just seemed like an overcorrection to me. So I found that interesting, and I don't think I think he's going to go way earlier than the 4th round.
Yeah, and that's someone in the NFL changing their tune because National actually had him graded as the 2nd overall prospect coming into the season. So it's not like the NFL didn't like him, and that's not even including combine numbers and things like that where he'd probably rise. I mean, he's going to be an athlete. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing. I know we talked about. I talked about it with Sully Sparks because Sully wasn't a Boise guy, and Sully's really smart as far as offensive line goes. He's not the brightest bull, but he does offensive line pretty well.
Sully's awesome.
He was kind of celebrating that a little bit, like, yo, I told you guys he was trash, and they were like, you really think he's that bad? And he's like, no, not that bad.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as he is on Abui. It's just never clicked for me. But again, with the talent level that he's going to display, some coach is going to think they can work with him, and he's going to have to play early. He's not going to be a 4th-round guy that is kind of on the edge of being disposable in the NFL.
Yeah, I think Scott Carrick put it. Oh, sorry about that. I think Scott Carrick put it really well, where he said, as a left tackle prospect, he looks like, a 3rd, 4th-round pick. But if you're looking at him as a right tackle type of guy, or at least starting at right tackle at first, he's probably going to be a 1st, 2nd-round type for you.
Yeah.
Justin, what was your other rumor that you had heard?
My other rumor, I think I covered all of them that as far as I know. Yeah.
Okay.
I think those UW guys are going to end up coming out. I mean, Shaq Thompson, Marcus Peters, who's recently left the program. Besides that, I think that's all the rumors that I've heard as far as guys coming out are concerned.
Justin, anything else from you tonight, man?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
And Justin texted me yesterday, I want to say, let me look, about the kid from ASU. Oh, jeez.
Oh, Hardison. Marcus Hardison.
Yes, Marcus Hardison. Did you want to talk about him for a second, or were you okay?
Yeah, Hardison was a guy that really caught my eye. In that Notre Dame game, he had a tip. He intercepted a tip pass. He had a couple other passes that he tipped at the line of scrimmage, and we talked about how Golson's vulnerable to that. I think he also had a sack. He's really come on as a senior, from what I understand, and now I've got a chance to look at him another game in addition to that. I think that he's a player that's going to grade out really well on the athletic testing scale. He might kind of be a one-year wonder from what people are telling me, but don't be surprised if Marcus Hardison's a name that's going to start to rise as this process goes on. He looked like a really effective, it could be a 3-tech at the pro level, but he's playing all along that line for ASU, and somebody lit a fire under him this year because he looks really talented, and he was going up against Stanley a couple times, and it was a pretty good battle.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. He hadn't really been on my radar. I mean, before the season, like you said, he was a junior college transfer guy, so it's always hard to tell with those guys how much they've actually progressed throughout their college career. But last year, I mean, he wasn't even a starter, and this year he is. I'm looking at the website, ASU's website, and they list him as someone who was a 4.7. At his size, that looks impressive because he looks much larger than the 300 pounds that they listed him at, especially at a body that's supposed to have the frame of someone who's 6'4". I'm trying to think of what his name was. Lawrence Guy, out of Arizona State a couple seasons ago. That almost on the surface area, same school, junior college transfer, all sorts of stuff like that. That almost seemed like the guy that I would compare him to.
He plays a little more athletic for me than Guy did, but yeah, I can see that where ASU does a good job getting their undersized interior linemen in situations where they can win, something that I don't think enough teams do with guys that are elite athletes inside, but maybe are not up to snuff in terms of strength and anchoring and holding down blocks and things of that nature. And it took 5 games before ASU's defense actually started coming around. So I think the fact that the defense is playing better now, maybe Hardison will start to get some notice on that team. All right, guys. Well, that's it from us tonight. I appreciate you guys hanging out for the last hour. And we'll do this again next week. So you guys have a good night.
You too.
Take it easy, fellas.
See ya.